The storm came without warning. It wasn't on the radar. There were no alerts. Just a sudden flash across the sky, then a blackout, and screaming. The small town of Ashford had never known chaos like that. Power lines down, roads flooded, a gas leak igniting to homes on the corner of Maple and 6th. But amid the panic and sirens, one dog didn't hesitate. His name was Ranger, a 7-year-old K9 German Shepherd who had served beside Officer Daniels for over 5 years. And that night, Ranger would make a decision no training could have ever prepared him for. The call came through dispatch around 11:40 p.m. Officer Daniels was already on patrol when the explosion lit up the sky. He turned the cruiser toward the blast instinctively, and Ranger, as always, was by his side, steady and ready. "Let's move, boy." They arrived to find fire consuming to homes. A third was catching fast. Civilians were screaming, some running barefoot on broken glass. Then a woman cried out. Her voice cut through the roar of fire. "My daughter, my baby's inside." Ranger didn't wait. Before Daniels could even issue a command, the dog leapt from the back of the cruiser and darted toward the collapsing front porch. Ranger, no, but he was gone. What happened next would be talked about for years, through the smoke. Ranger was seen pushing through the cracked door. A moment passed, then another. Every second was a lifetime. And then he emerged, holding the toddler's shirt gently in his, teeth leading her through the smoke. Behind him, a bookshelf came crashing down. Flames licked at the doorway just as they escaped. The crowd gasped, someone sobbed. The mother collapsed to her knees, screaming thanks through her tears. The child, coughing but alive, was safe, but Ranger he was not. Daniels rushed forward. The dog was struggling to breathe. His eyes blinked, but his legs gave out. The vet would later say the smoke damage was irreversible. His lungs had sacrificed themselves for the air that child needed. The officer wrapped his arms around his partner. Ranger rested his head on Daniel's chest and didn't move again. A silence fell over the street. Firemen stopped. Neighbors stopped. Everyone just stood there, watching as a hero died, not with a whimper, but with purpose. What happened the next morning would change the town forever. Flags flew at half-mast. A black ribbon was tied to the station gate. And on every front porch of every home Ranger had ever patrolled past, there was a candle burning. Officer Daniels sat on his porch, still in uniform. In his lap, Ranger's badge rested, still warm. He hadn't let go of it all night. But what the mayor announced just hours later would make the entire town gather in ways no one expected. The ceremony had reached its peak, the air thick with the weight of grief. Daniels stood at the edge of the gathering, his gaze fixed on the small casket draped with an American flag. The sky above was clouded, casting a gray, somber shadow over the town square. The crowd, gathered in silence, seemed to hold their breath. For everyone here, this was more than just a funeral. It was a moment to honor a fallen hero, a K9 hero who had given everything to protect this community. But for Daniels, this was also a personal loss that transcended duty. This was his partner, his best friend. Ranger had been more than just a K9 unit. He had been Daniels' lifeline. Through thick and thin, the two had formed an unspoken bond, one that had saved both their lives countless times. Now, Ranger was gone, and all Daniels could do was stand there, trying to piece together the emotions that had been swirling inside him since that fateful day. As the eulogies began, Daniels found himself struggling to focus. The words of the speaker blended into a dull hum. His mind wandered back to that momentous moment when Ranger had made the ultimate sacrifice. His partner had been the first to run into the building, the first to face the danger head-on. Daniels had watched, helpless, as the explosion rang out, throwing them both to the ground. And when he awoke, Ranger was gone. He shook his head, trying to push the memory away. But it was no use. Every day since that day, the grief had been eating away at him, gnawing at his soul, leaving him hollow. He could still hear the crackle of Ranger's radio, the panting of his partner as they navigated through dangerous situations. He could still see Ranger's eyes, full of determination, ready to charge into whatever awaited them. The bond they shared was undeniable. The crowd's murmurs pulled him back to reality. He stood at the edge of the gathering, trying to steady his thoughts. He hadn't planned to speak today, but something urged him to step forward. He knew he couldn't remain silent. Ranger deserved more than a moment of silence. He deserved recognition for his loyalty, his courage, and his sacrifice. Daniels took a deep breath, gathering the strength he had kept hidden for so long. He stepped forward, his boots echoing softly on the cobblestones, and the crowd parted as he approached the podium. The moment was heavy, the weight of 1,000 eyes on him, waiting for him to say something meaningful. "Today, we honor a hero," Daniels began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "But not just any hero. This hero was my partner, my friend, my family." The words came slowly, each one heavy with emotion. He paused for a moment, trying to find the right way to describe the bond he had with Ranger. The memories flooded his mind, each one more vivid than the last. He could almost feel the rush of adrenaline from their past missions, hear the commands they had shared, the silent understanding that had passed between them during the most dangerous moments. Ranger wasn't just a dog. He was a K-9 unit, trained to protect, to serve, to risk his life without hesitation. But he was also more than that. He was my partner, Daniels continued, his voice cracking. He was the first one in the door when no one else dared. He was the one who put himself between me and danger without ever questioning it. He was the one who made the ultimate sacrifice so that others could live. The crowd was silent, each person hanging on to his words. But Daniels could feel the weight of their expectations. He could feel the question hanging in the air. How could he continue without his partner? How could he move forward when a part of him had been ripped away forever? As the words left his mouth, Daniels couldn't help but look at the casket once more. The flag billowed gently in the breeze, a symbol of the sacrifice made. He felt a pang of guilt. Could he have done more? Could he have saved his partner? These thoughts had tormented him ever since that fateful day. Ranger was more than just a part of my job, Daniels continued, trying to regain his composure. He was my family, and though he is gone, he will never be forgotten. I will carry his memory with me every single day. I will remember his loyalty, his bravery, and the way he always had my back when I needed him the most. His voice faltered, and he took a moment to steady himself. The emotions that had been building up inside him seemed to surge forward, threatening to overwhelm him. He had spent so much time trying to keep his feelings hidden, trying to stay strong for the community. But now, in this moment, the dam had broke. Ranger was a true hero, and he will always be remembered as one. He stepped back from the podium, his heart pounding in his chest. The crowd stood in silence, their eyes fixed on him, their expressions a mixture of sadness and respect. Daniels felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. He had said what he needed to say, but the pain was still there, lingering just beneath the surface. The ceremony continued, but Daniels barely heard the words spoken. He was lost in his thoughts, trying to find a way to move on from the grief that weighed so heavily on him. As the final salute was given and the crowd began to disperse, Daniels stood alone by the flag-draped casket. The moment felt surreal, as if time itself had stopped. And then, as if on cue, a young woman stepped forward from the crowd, her eyes filled with tears. She approached Daniels, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "You don't have to do this alone," she said softly. "We're all here for you." Daniels didn't know how to respond. The words caught in his throat. He wasn't sure what he needed. He had lost so much, and yet there was still a part of him that longed for something he couldn't explain. But in that moment, he realized that Ranger wasn't just a hero to him. He had been a hero to everyone. The young woman stepped closer, her hand resting gently on Daniel's shoulder. She said nothing else, but in her presence, Daniels felt a small glimmer of comfort. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind him that even in the darkest of times, there was still light. The days after the funeral were the hardest Daniels had ever endured. The weight of the loss seemed unbearable, and every moment was a reminder of the void left behind by his partner. It was as though a part of him had been ripped out, leaving a gaping hole that nothing seemed to fill. Even his fellow officers, who had seen him through countless dangerous situations, couldn't reach him now. No matter how hard they tried, They couldn't bring him back from the abyss of grief he was sinking into. For days, Daniels had refused to leave his apartment. The memories of Ranger kept him up at night, and the once comforting silence of the apartment now felt suffocating. The radio, once a lifeline between him and his partner, lay silent on the kitchen counter. The badge that had once been a symbol of pride felt like an anchor dragging him further into the depths of sorrow. But one day, as Daniels sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from him, he heard something. It was faint at first, almost as if he was imagining it. A soft scratching sound. It took him a moment to realize where it was coming from. He stood up and walked to the door, his heart racing. Could it be? Could it be possible that Ranger had come back? The thought was absurd, but the sound persisted. It was unmistakable now. Daniels swung the door open, half expecting to find nothing but emptiness. Instead, he was greeted by an unexpected sight. A small black and white dog sitting on the doorstep, its tail wagging furiously. Daniels froze. It wasn't Ranger, but the sight of this new dog stirred something deep within him. He crouched down slowly, not sure whether he was ready for another companion. The dog, sensing his hesitation, stepped forward and nuzzled his hand. As if trying to comfort him, Daniels sighed, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. "You're not Ranger," he muttered under his breath, but the dog's eyes held a softness, a vulnerability that reminded him of his old partner. He knelt beside the dog, petting it gently. It was small, almost fragile, but there was an undeniable strength in its eyes. The dog had clearly been through something. It was as if it knew the pain Daniels was feeling, and somehow it was here to help him heal. "Where did you come from?" Daniels whispered, his voice trembling. He didn't expect an answer, of course, but the dog seemed to understand. It sat beside him, its body leaning into him as if offering silent support. As Daniel sat there, feeling the warmth of the dog's presence, memories of Ranger flooded back. He remembered the way Ranger had always been by his side, how they had worked together seamlessly, each one knowing the other's moves without a word. It was a bond that could never be replicated, and yet, this stranger had somehow found a way to fill the emptiness, if only for a moment. But as the days passed, something began to change. The more time Daniels spent with the dog, the more he realized that this small creature wasn't just a replacement for Ranger. It was a reminder that there was still hope. Despite the overwhelming loss, life had a way of bringing unexpected gifts, small moments of light in the darkest times. One evening, as Daniels and the dog sat together on the porch, he found himself opening up. He spoke aloud, even though he knew the dog couldn't understand the full weight of his words. "I don't know how to move on," Daniels confessed, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I miss him every day, and I feel like I'll never be whole again." The dog tilted its head, ears perking up as it listened intently. It wasn't much, but for the first time in weeks, Daniels felt a flicker of relief. He wasn't alone. Not entirely. But even as the days passed, and the dog began to settle into his life, Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. The dog was a comfort, yes, but it was not Ranger. And there were days when Daniels felt the crushing weight of that truth more than ever. He had to find a way to heal, but he didn't know how. The thought of moving forward without Ranger felt like a betrayal to everything they had shared. And yet, as much as he clung to the past, life was moving forward, whether he was ready for it or not. Daniels tried to push these feelings aside, but they lingered, always in the back of his mind. He went back to work, slowly resuming his duties, but it wasn't the same. His eyes were constantly searching for something, for a sign that he wasn't completely alone. He didn't know what that sign would look like, but he couldn't stop himself from looking. One evening, while walking through the quiet streets of the town, Daniels came across a memorial dedicated to the fallen K-9 units. It had been built just a few years earlier, a place where the community could come together to honor the sacrifice of these incredible dogs. The memorial was simple, but its significance was clear. It was a tribute to the unsung heroes who had given everything for their partners, for the community, and for the greater good. Daniels stood in front of the memorial for what felt like hours, lost in thought. He thought about Ranger, about their shared moments, the dangers they had faced together, the victories, the defeats, and he thought about the future. Could he ever find peace again? Could he ever truly move on? The question lingered in his mind as he stood there, alone with his thoughts. But as he gazed at the names engraved on the memorial, something inside him shifted. Maybe he wasn't meant to move on in the way he had imagined. Maybe it wasn't about forgetting Ranger. Maybe it was about honoring him by living the life he had helped Daniels build, by continuing to serve, and by finding a way to embrace the new possibilities that life had to offer. And so, with a deep breath, Daniels made a promise to himself. He would honor Ranger's memory not by living in the past, but by embracing the present, by letting go of the grief that had held him captive for so long, and by allowing himself to heal. The dog at his side, as if sensing the shift in Daniels' heart, nudged his hand gently. Daniels smiled faintly, feeling a small but powerful spark of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to take the first step. And as the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the memorial, Daniels knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. But he wasn't alone anymore. He had a companion by his side, one step closer to healing. Days turned into weeks, and Daniels found himself adjusting to a life that was somehow both familiar and new. The dog, whose name he had decided to call Ace, had become a constant presence in his life, offering him companionship during his quiet moments of reflection. There were still days when the weight of Ranger's absence felt unbearable, but with Ace by his side, Daniels began to realize that perhaps healing didn't mean forgetting. The grief was still there, a shadow that followed him every day. But Ace had become his bridge to the present. Ace wasn't a replacement for Ranger. He was a reminder of the future, of the potential for healing, of new beginnings. And yet, there were times when Daniels would catch himself staring at Ace, wondering if he would ever be able to fully accept this new reality. One evening, Daniels sat in the living room, looking at a framed photograph of himself and Ranger. It was a picture from one of their early days on the force, a time before the weight of loss and duty had clouded their bond. The memory felt distant now, almost like a dream he couldn't fully grasp. It was hard to believe that the dog in that picture, so full of life and energy, was gone. Ace sat at his feet, watching him silently. Daniels absent-mindedly ran his fingers through the dog's fur, feeling the softness that contrasted with the sharpness of his emotions. There was a comfort in the simple act, a reminder that despite everything, he wasn't truly alone. Ace, in his own quiet way, was helping him rebuild. The next morning, Daniels found himself at the K9 Memorial once again. He hadn't planned on going, but something had called him there. Maybe it was the anniversary of Ranger's death, or maybe it was just the overwhelming need to find peace. As he walked past the stone plaques engraved with the names of fallen K9 officers, he felt the familiar weight of grief settle on his chest. But there, at the memorial, something shifted. He had come here so many times before, each visit filled with sadness, yet this time, he felt something different. As if in a moment of clarity, Daniels understood that the memorial wasn't just a place to mourn, it was a place to honor. He knelt down before Ranger's plaque, his fingers brushing the engraved name. "I'll never forget you, buddy," Daniels whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm learning to live for both of us now." Ace stood by his side, watching silently, sensing the shift in Daniels' heart. It wasn't just a moment of closure, it was a moment of renewal. For the first time in months, Daniels felt as though he could breathe, as if the grief that had once held him captive was beginning to loosen its grip. But the journey wasn't over. Daniels knew that he couldn't simply walk away from the past, and there would still be days when the weight of loss would feel unbearable. He understood now that healing wasn't a linear path. It was filled with setbacks, breakthroughs, and moments of doubt, but it was a journey that had to be taken one step at a time. Over the next few weeks, Daniels and Ace continued to grow together. Ace wasn't just a dog. He had become a lifeline. The bond between them was still young, but it was beginning to form into something deeper. And as Daniels watched Ace play in the yard, chasing after a ball with unbridled joy, he couldn't help but smile. In many ways, Ace had become the embodiment of what Daniels needed most, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was still light to be found. and Ace had brought that light into his life when he thought it was gone for good. But there was something else that kept nagging at Daniels. It was a feeling that had been lingering in the back of his mind for weeks now. He wasn't sure if he was ready to confront it, but he knew it was time. One evening, after a long day of work, Daniels sat at his desk, flipping through old case files. As he scanned the pages, his mind wandered. He thought about the days before Ranger's death, about the work they had done together. He thought about the dangers they had faced, the criminals they had brought to justice, and the bond they had shared. Suddenly, the realization hit him. He hadn't just lost a partner. He had lost a part of himself. Ranger had been more than just a dog to him. He had been a reflection of Daniel's own strength, loyalty, and purpose. Losing Ranger had left a void that Daniels hadn't known how to fill. And yet, as Daniels sat there in the quiet of his office, Ace lying at his feet, he realized something else. The void wasn't as empty as he had once believed. It was filled with memories, with lessons learned, with love that would never fade. The bond he had shared with Ranger would always be a part of him, but that didn't mean he had to stop living. Daniels stood up, his resolve hardening. He knew that Ranger would always be a part of him, but he also knew that it was time to embrace the present and the future. Ace had shown him that. The dog was a living testament to the fact that life continued, even in the face of loss. "Thank you," Daniels whispered to Ace, who looked up at him with those trusting eyes. "You've helped me more than you'll ever know." The next day, Daniels returned to the memorial once again, but this time, it was different. This time, he wasn't there to mourn. He was there to honor. As he stood before Ranger's plaque, he placed a fresh bouquet of flowers and stood there for a long while, lost in thought. He didn't need to say anything. He didn't need to explain it to anyone. He simply needed to be there, to pay his respects, and to let go. The pain wasn't gone, but it had transformed. It wasn't as overwhelming as it once was, and it no longer defined him. It had become a part of who he was, just like everything else that had shaped him. And for the first time in months, Daniels felt peace. As he walked away from the memorial, Ace by his side, Daniels knew that his journey was far from over, but now he was ready for it. He was ready to face whatever came next.